One issue Congress never did resolve before going home to campaign is immigration. The House deadlocked over a proposal favored by President Bush and most of the Senate to adopt a guest worker program and to grant citizenship for some illegal immigrants. Both chambers passed, and the president just signed, laws to build a fence across the U.S.-Mexico border and boost border patrols. In a three-part series, To the Contrary looks at three aspects of legal and illegal immigration: on American families, on American wages, on America's healthcare system, and on the environment. In our first segment, we examine the impact on wages. You heard this line from President Bush, or something like it, dozens of times this year.
People are having trouble finding work that Americans won't do. And that's a fact of life.
Or is it? President Bush launched his push for immigration reform, saying immigrants take jobs Americans won't do, and later changed his phraseology to jobs Americans don't want. But are these really jobs Americans won't do, or jobs Americans don't want because immigrants, both legal and illegal, work for lower pay than Americans will accept?
Well, there's some jobs that Americans don't want to do, but most of the jobs that immigrants currently do were at one time done by Americans. What immigrants have done is to depress the wages in those industries to levels that are unacceptable to Americans. So, and the employers of in those industries are very happy to have access to low-wage immigrant workers.
And so consequently, it's not surprising most of the immigrant population, legal and illegal, are in the low-wage occupations, competing for entry into those low-wage occupations. And they're competing with the native-born and the immigrants who have been legally admitted to the United States who are also in those populations. Many of these jobs, I might point out, are also known as entry-level jobs, in which most people in the United States at one time in their life have actually worked in low-wage occupations. So it's not a matter of simply that there's nobody to do these occupations. There's no sign of any real shortage of labor in these low-wage occupations in the United States. Wages are not going up at the bottom. That's the tragedy of all this. The wages at the bottom are not going up for the citizens. I remember there are 37 million low-wage workers in the United States. People making less than $8.50 an hour. That's a considerable number of people, 37 million.
Many American industries have become dependent on a steady supply of young, legal or illegal immigrants to fill low-wage jobs. According to the website workpermit.com, quote, about 12.1% of the current U.S. population was born in another country. Some estimates put the immigrant worker population in entry-level positions at U.S. hotels and restaurants as high as 80%. This also impacts the service industries such as hospitality, leisure, recreation, childcare, healthcare, assisted living, long-term care, and other personal services, end quote. Amusement parks, for example, depend on a steady supply of mainly Eastern European teens who enter the U.S. legally on temporary work permits each summer. Same for the hotel industry and farm work, and construction. Some industries fill jobs mainly or exclusively with legal immigrants. Others do not. In all these industries, it's difficult, if not impossible, to separate legal from illegal immigrants. The Pew Hispanic Center keeps data separating out legal from illegal immigrant workers. The center estimates that 7.2 million unauthorized foreigners make up almost 5% of the U.S. workforce. At the lower end of the wage scale, they are 24% of hired farm workers, 17% of cleaners, and 12% of food preparation workers.
25% of the farm workers in the United States are illegal immigrants, which tells you right from the beginning that 75% are American citizens, either native-born or legal immigrants in the United States who are working in those jobs. And so it's simply not true that they're not citizens who do these jobs.
Cuban-born Harvard economist George Borjas co-wrote a paper stating the wave of illegal Mexican immigrants who arrived between 1980 and 2000 reduced the average wages of American high school dropouts by 8.2%. David Card, an economist at UC Berkeley, offers a different opinion. In 1980, 125,000 mainly low-skilled Cuban workers arrived in Miami during the famed Mariel boat lift, when CARD compared the wages of low-income, predominantly African Americans in Miami with those in 4 cities not hit by massive influxes of new workers. He found low-skilled workers in Miami actually did better than their counterparts in other cities. Low-skilled workers in Tampa, Atlanta, Houston, and Los Angeles saw their wages go fractionally lower than the year before, while those in Miami saw wages rise marginally. Many economists say this was a special circumstance that does not apply nationwide.
Those people were also received significant benefits from the federal government. There was assistance for refugees. There was an organized refugee adjustment program to find jobs for the people, to find housing for them, to deal with their needs. It was a very special case and a very limited labor market.
Union officials agree abuse of immigration laws by some corporations leads to wage depression and exploitation. They blame lax federal enforcement, particularly of visas that were designed to let temporary workers come to the U.S. for what was supposed to be temporary seasonal work, but turns instead to full-time, lower-paying jobs.
We're seeing the destruction of the good, solid middle-class job in the United States in general. So what we're seeing with these temporary worker programs are that just as much as employers are outsourcing certain aspects of their work right now, they're trying to use these temporary worker programs, these H programs, as a way to insource exploitable workers. So, and that will create a secondary class of workers, and the more that these programs grow in size, grow in scope, the bigger that secondary class of workers gets. Whenever you have a class of workers that can be easily exploited, that has a downward negative impact on all workers' wages, regardless of citizenship status, regardless of gender, race. Workers as a whole suffer,
including higher income workers. A report released this spring by the Pew Hispanic Center showed roughly half of the illegal immigrants in the U.S. entered legally and overstayed their visas. Those who entered as student or business visitors are more likely to be highly skilled. As a result, many of them stayed in the U.S. to work in the computer, biotech, and engineering fields.
Well, there was a study last year that found that H-1B visas, which are the most common way to bring in high-skilled laborers for about a 6-year period, are undercutting our technology and program workers by about $13,000. That is, when the study is done to look at them in the same job in the same state, they're being paid $13,000 less than American workers.
Other immigrants gained valuable construction skills in the United States and moved to higher wage jobs. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, statistics suggest many are replacing African Americans whose employment in concrete work declined to 9,000 in 2005 from 18,000 6 years ago, end quote. The Bureau of Labor Statistics indicate wages in concrete work fell 16.5% in 2005 to $508 a week from $604 a week adjusted for inflation. This despite a soaring demand for workers. Meanwhile, the proportion of cement workers described as foreign-born Hispanic has risen almost 55% from around 35% in the late 1990s. While economists debate whether immigration depresses wages, they also differ on immigration's impact on America's wealth and who gets the lion's share. Advocates for increased immigration say immigrants, whether legal or illegal, are also consumers and thus create additional jobs by buying goods and services. But some economists are beginning to say immigration also shifts wealth away from the poor and toward the already wealthy.
Because of immigration, there's been a tremendous redistribution of income in this country from the have-nots to the haves. It's exactly the opposite of what you would want in a fair society. A lot of that income, of course, has gone into corporate profits.
Mr. Rubenstein has also written, quote, corporate profits in the fourth quarter of 2005 claimed the largest share of GDP in 40 years. Not since the third quarter of 1966 have profits taken a larger chunk of the economy. The foreign-born share of the labor force, 15% in 2005, is also unprecedented. Cheaper immigrant labor redistributes income from native workers to employers, end quote. This is not the first time in American history mass immigration had an impact on U.S. wages. In the 1840s, 2 million Irish citizens fled the potato famine for the United States. Italians, Jews, and Eastern Europeans came in the so-called Great Wave later in the 19th century, but there are historic differences.
During the Great Wave of 100 years ago, the immigrants were low-skilled, low-educated, but so were most Americans. So the difference was not as great then. Today, most of the foreign workers are similarly low-skilled, low-educated, but Americans are far more highly skilled. So their effect is on a smaller group of Americans in terms of direct competition.